All of our dreams are about to come true in Donkey Kong Bananza. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I'm going to be doing my initial analysis and thoughts on this Donkey Kong Bananza Direct. This was an amazing presentation, and I think you could very easily argue this might just be the best game-specific Nintendo Direct we have ever gotten. Which I also find to be quite interesting considering that many people were thinking this Direct presentation would not be good because many people were disappointed by the Mario Kart World Direct. But this Bananza Direct was absolute peak. It was absolute fire. I've watched this Direct over several times now. Every time I have goosebumps, I'm emotional, and there have been so many theories we've had about Bananza that have been confirmed from this Direct, but there are still other theories we have yet to see full confirmation for, but there does appear to be even more evidence to support those theories. So we'll be talking about that and just some amazing, interesting observations I've made of Donkey Kong Bananza from the information we've gotten today. But before going forward, let me point out I'm aiming for a goal of 60,000 subscribers. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So Nintendo opens up the Direct by confirming a theory a lot of us have had, and that's that Odd Rock is indeed Pauline, a young version of Pauline. And so we learned throughout this big Direct that Pauline is going to be playing a major role. She is the companion character DK throughout this game, and she plays a significant role to the gameplay and the story. We see her singing along, we see some incredible voice acting. There are several songs we hear throughout this Direct that are in the voice of Pauline. We see even some voice acted lines as well. And so she's very involved here with the story, and her singing has magical powers. Her singing gives Donkey Kong new forms, Bananza forms. And so it looks like these Bananza forms are the replacement for your animal buddies. And I'll speak more on animal buddies in a moment here, but just keeping to this whole thing with Pauline. Pauline is a big part to this game. Even when you're collecting different costumes, you can get different costumes for Pauline. And also I'll say I think it's really cool that you can expand your skill set throughout the game. Some very interesting RPG mechanics there. But many people are freaking out about what this means for the overall story and lore of Mario and Donkey Kong here. Because if we have a young Pauline, but also Cranky Kong, who is the original Donkey Kong, both in this game, what's going on? Because the original Pauline was also in her prime alongside the original Donkey Kong, who is now an old Cranky Kong. Some people are just saying it's a straight retcon and Nintendo does not care about that prior history, yet I find that theory to be a little hard to believe just because there's clearly so many references to Donkey Kong history here. There are a lot of Donkey Kong Country tracks. They have the DK rap from Donkey Kong 64 playing throughout this Direct presentation. There's tons of references to the original Donkey Kong with all the girders, and of course Cranky Kong himself. We've already seen all the dialogue lines making references to that. And so it's very much apparent that the developers of Donkey Kong Bananza had Donkey Kong 1981 in mind, and just all the different Donkey Kong games in mind when making this game. So to think that they're just totally retconning the fact that there was a Pauline character alongside the original Donkey Kong, I don't think that's what's going on here. Of course, that is a possibility. Maybe they don't care about story, although looking at all the cutscenes and all the voice acting and how impactful it appears to be, I definitely think they actually care very much about the story in Bananza. This might be one of the best Nintendo stories we have ever gotten. That's what I'm left thinking after watching this presentation, especially those final moments where we hear Pauline singing, talking about her wish, and we see her falling away from DK. There are some very powerful moments there, so I'm left thinking this is going to be an impressive story for Nintendo standards, if not just for gaming standards in general. But coming back to this whole Pauline time-age paradox here, other people are theorizing that maybe there's some time travel involved, or maybe she's been de-aged. These are also possibilities. However, we do know from the Nintendo website that Pauline is a 13-year-old girl, as you see here. A 13-year-old girl who loves to sing. She used to live above ground, but for some reason she was brought to the underground world and transformed into a rock. Now, we don't know what that reason is. That has not been explained. Maybe she's a 13-year-old girl that's been taken from a different time. Maybe she was an adult woman that was reverted to a teenager. These are possibilities, I'm sure. But I have another theory that no one seems to be talking about, and I've talked about this for a while, and I think this honestly makes the most sense and would explain away a lot of these issues. There are just different generations of Donkey Kong, Mario, and also Pauline. And we've seen some evidence of that because, well, look at Cranky Kong, right? Cranky Kong once upon a time was the Donkey Kong, and now the Donkey Kong we have today is not the original Donkey Kong. He's just the Donkey Kong of modern standards today. And then you look at Mario and you consider how he was Jumpman back in Donkey Kong of 1981. Is that the same Mario, or is this a new generation of Mario? And then what about Baby Mario? How does that fit into the picture? It's hard to sort of have it fit and make sense unless you kind of buy into my theory that there are just different generations of Donkey Kong and Mario. And if so, that's the case. Here we're seeing a young version of Pauline. Maybe it's just another version of Pauline. Maybe this is the next generation of Pauline and not the same Pauline we've seen from before. I mean, this Pauline has freckles. The other Paulines don't have freckles, so what's going on with that? Is this just a product of her being a teenager and she loses that when she becomes an adult? A possibility. And I suppose it should also be brought up that it's entirely possible that my theory is correct, and that there are different generations of Donkey Kong, Mario, and Pauline. But that can be the case, and this Pauline is not the Pauline from Donkey Kong of 1981, but is still the Pauline we've seen from New Donk City in Mario Odyssey. And so that part's an interesting thing to consider, because we do hear Pauline talking about in this direct that she has a dream that she wants to do with Donkey Kong once they get back to the surface, presumably after the events of this game. And we know in Mario Odyssey, they have New Donk City, a New York-like city in the Mario world that clearly has a lot of references to Donkey Kong, with the girders, with the references to Cranky Kong, Dixie Kong, Diddy Kong, and of course, Donkey Kong himself. So perhaps the events of this game will lead to the events of Super Mario Odyssey, where there will be a New Donk City and Pauline will be the mayor. And given that she's only 13 years old, 5 to 6 years later where she's a young adult as the mayor in New Donk City, I don't think are really that much of a stretch, and 5 to 6 years wouldn't be so far into the future that we wouldn't be able to expect modern Mario or modern Donkey Kong to be around. And this also brings me back to what we've seen in Mario Kart World, how in the Mario Kart World credits we've seen that Donkey Kong and Pauline are having a very interesting interaction there, as if they're quite friendly with each other, perhaps like they've had an adventure together before, which may be what we're seeing here in Donkey Kong Bananza. They could be the same Pauline, and Donkey Kong Bananza is actually just a prequel to Super Mario Odyssey. Now, something else worth pointing out here is that it appears in Donkey Kong Bananza there are already references to New Donk City. As you see here from these boxes in Ingot Isle, they say NDC, New Donk City, could be. We even see that there is some kind of city off into the distance in the scene where we see Ingot Isle being forced underground. So I would say there's a strong chance there is some sort of relation here. But let's now move beyond Pauline and let's talk a little bit about some gameplay reveals for Bananza here. Something that I found to be quite interesting is that they show off all these different things you can do with Donkey Kong's moveset, and it's quite a bit, and we can see how it can all chain into each other. Pretty amazing stuff. We already know that Donkey Kong can still do the roll into the air and then jump off midair, but he also has a double jump that he can do when he's holding some sort of chunk of something, and you can throw that to the ground while in the air to get a second jump. But something we don't see is Donkey Kong being able to swim underwater. He might be able to dive down briefly, but not entirely. And I bring this up because I noticed something when they were showing off the new Bananza forms. In the Zebra Bananza form, Donkey Kong can run so quickly he can run across the surface of water, which is very cool. But I also noticed in this scene we can see that there is some gold underwater in a circle, and it's a few feet down below. This is perhaps evidence that we'll be able to swim underwater. Now, what's interesting about this is that we have learned that you can obtain new skills as you progress in the game, as they show off Surf, for example, where you can take a rock and not only surf on the ground, but also on the surface of the water as well. So perhaps later on into the game we could also obtain a skill that allows us to swim deeply underwater and not just the surface. Another possibility is that you just do the punch dive, where you briefly go underwater to collect the gold, and you just have to do this a few times to get them all in a ring, or if you do it in the center of the ring, you just get all the gold at once. That's a possibility, although the least exciting of all the possibilities. Another one, though, is perhaps maybe On Guard, the swordfish, an animal buddy from prior Donkey Kong games, could also be making a comeback here, and maybe On Guard can help us collect gold underwater like this. I would say this possibility is the least likely. I do think most likely we're going to be able to obtain some sort of skill, but it wouldn't be surprised if On Guard is still involved with the gameplay in some way. We've gone full-on confirmation that Rambi is a part of the gameplay. We see Rambi traveling with Cranky Kong, so that's awesome to see. But also we've seen Rambi in the Rambi Rumble, which appears to be a kind of racing minigame that is ran by, pun intended there, Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong. They are in this game. It is confirmed. We've seen gameplay of them. We cannot play with them, but we can play against them, it looks like. And so they are involved. And I just find this whole Rambi Rumble thing to be quite interesting, that they are running it. We even see these giant Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong statues here, so clearly this is something they're really pushing, and they're not trying to hide Diddy or Dixie Kong for whatever reason. They are part of Donkey Kong, and they're gonna stick around, so this is fantastic news. But similar to how there's a Rambi Rumble, could there be some sort of challenge or minigame course involving On Guard in the future? That is a possibility. And maybe there may be some for other animal buddies we've seen in Donkey Kong history, like Espresso, for example, the ostrich. We see that there is an ostrich village, and we even see that there's an ostrich elder that appears to be wearing the same shoes as Espresso. And so some people are wondering, is this the original Espresso who's gone a lot older and more ancient? Or is it perhaps simply a similarity, a reference, and Espresso somewhere else? I'm going to assume that Espresso is definitely in the game. We've seen all these ostriches, so I think it's safe to say he is there. Which one is Espresso though? That's where there's some debate. But maybe Espresso is also involved with some sort of mini-game course where you have to race around on an ostrich, or you race along with the ostriches, similar to what we see with Rambi Rumble, and maybe also some sort of underwater On Guard course as well. And so a lot of theories we've had about this game have been confirmed so far. Pauline being in the game, Pauline being Oddrock, Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong being in the game, Rambi being playable, all of these things are the case. But there's one big theory we've been continually circling around that has yet to have been confirmed, and personally, if you go back to my predictions, I did not expect it to be revealed in this direct. Diddy Kong and maybe Pauline, yes, but King K. Rool, I did not expect to be confirmed in this presentation, but saved as a big surprise when we actually play the game when it comes out next month, perhaps as the big final secret boss. And we have found some additional interesting evidence to support this theory here. Now, I'm not going to go over all the different bits of King K. Rool evidence we've already talked about in the past. There's a whole bunch. Clearly, there are undead Kremlins involved at the very least, and there's a lot of references to the Donkey Kong Country games and Donkey Kong 64 where King K. Rool was the main big bad. But there are some interesting things we see throughout this direct that seem to be adding to the conversation here. One, they do show off the different Donkey Kong amiibo, which also includes the King K. Rool amiibo, and so in some form we did see King K. Rool in a Donkey Kong Bananza direct. Could this perhaps be a subtle reference that King K. Rool will be involved with the game, or is it just because it's a Donkey Kong related amiibo they're showing it here? I'm sure some people are going to assume it's just the latter, but I do think it's probably a little bit of both. Another subtle thing we see late into the direct, we see something off into the distance that looks like a giant crocodile mouth. Some sort of big structure. Could just be a reference, but it seems to be one of many references we've seen of crocodiles and Kremlins being all throughout the land and history of Donkey Kong Bananza. But there's something else I saw that I found to be very, very curious. So you take a look at this little bit of footage here, there's like this structure, perhaps a plant-like structure, but very green-like with thorns that almost look like claws shooting out at DK. The greenness of it and the thorn-like claws remind me of almost something like a King K. Rool. And you might think that's a stretch, but stick with me here, I think it's way less of a stretch once you also consider this other bit of evidence. So going back to the Nintendo website for Bananza, we see here in the character description for Grumpy Kong that he is an executive who is skilled at creating giant combat soldiers, which we learned about in the Bananza Direct, but also he has a lot of knowledge about plants. And so considering that, he makes a whole bunch of boss enemies, and we've seen some of these boss enemies in Bananza, and a lot of them have the crocodile-like faces and structures that are clearly referencing Kremlins, and we even see the golden skeletons that appear to be pieces of undead or just skeletal remains of Kremlins from the Donkey Kong Country and DK64 games, which were all led by King K. Rool. But if he also has knowledge on plants, then we see this weird plant-like thing attacking Donkey Kong that appears to be somewhat similar to something like what we would have seen from King K. Rool, I think there actually might be another additional connection here. And just kind of thinking about what we've learned about the story of the game, DK and Pauline are racing to the core of the Earth, and they're competing against Voidco, who are also racing to the core of the Earth, because there's some sort of wish that will supposedly be granted. But I just think it's interesting that the end goal of this game is to reach the core, and we do know about the history of Croc Core, which we have seen references of in this game. Croc Core as in once upon a time the headquarters of the Kremlins and their leader, King K. Rool. So considering everything we've seen and learned about Donkey Kong Bananza, I am filled with so much confidence that this game is going to be amazing. The music, the references, all the gameplay variety, all the different worlds we can explore, the different layers, the involvement of Pauline, the story, the singing, all the different challenge courses which I didn't talk about but they look very exciting, and then the Rambi Rumble, Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong being involved, and a variety of different subtle hints towards what I believe to be King K. Rool and the Kremlins. I am just filled with so much excitement and confidence with how good this game is going to be. It is oozing detail and polish and love, and yes, Bananza is the real deal. Bananza is the huge single-player adventure game to start off the beginning of the Switch 2 generation. It comes out in the second month of the Switch 2, and I think it's going to be one amazing game. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.